one of the coaches with the Run Formula. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about Ultrarunning 101. So kind of the basics of ultra running. To give a little bit of background on who I am, I feel like the quick and easy way to put it is, you know, I'm an athlete, I'm a coach, and I'm a race director. Those are kind of the three different hats I wear in the running world. So I've been an endurance athlete my whole life, started cross-country skiing and orienteering when I was really young and did that through college, and then did several years of marathoning, some bike racing, some triathlons, and ultimately found the sport of ultra running and trail running, which is nowadays my bread and butter. And I've been coaching athletes basically since college, helping out with local high school teams. But I think coaching with the Run Formula for maybe 5 years, plus or minus, since then, and coaching mostly trail and ultra athletes. And then you'll hear me talk a little bit about some of the races. So I also race direct. So I direct the Vermont 100 endurance race, which is, as the title says, it's a 100-mile race in Vermont. And then I also direct a race called the Seven Sisters Trail Race, which was actually this past weekend. It's a 12-mile, probably the 12 gnarliest miles you ever find out here in Western Massachusetts of trail running. So, and a couple other races in there. So I wear a lot of different hats. Hopefully I answer kind of the basic questions that you guys have about ultra running, but certainly feel free to ask questions if you have more. I'm going to throw up my PowerPoint, and we're going to go from there. Cool. So Ultrarunning 101. And we're going to see if it lets me. There we go. So a little bit about what I'm going to cover, hopefully I'm going to answer these questions. So first of all, what is ultra running? Most of you guys probably know it, but maybe you'll learn a thing or two about kind of what we consider ultra running. How do you train for an ultra? A lot of you guys listening to this are already an endurance athlete. So how do you take that training and then just tweak it to be prepared to run an ultra? What are some of the components to successful ultra running? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other aspects of planning for success. And then the last few things I want to go over are just kind of my running lessons learned, shall we call them, and then my coaching lessons learned. And those are pretty universal. That's not ultra running specific, but given the opportunity to talk to you guys, I love the opportunity to kind of, I don't know, share my wisdom or maybe help you guys not make the same mistakes I made through the years. So ultra running basics. Technically, an ultra marathon is anything more than 26.2 miles. Pretty standard, right? In that, I've run everything from like a 28-mile race, which is technically an ultra, right? But there's fixed distances that are kind of the standard ultras. So a lot of the fixed distance races, it's a 50K, a 50-miler, 100K, or 100-mile race. Those are kind of the standard distances. There's 200-mile races that people are doing these days, which is amazing. And then there's also some races where, like that 28-mile race, somebody just finds a really cool loop and they decide to put a race on it, and no one really gets finicky about if it's an exact, pretty distance. It's just kind of part of ultra running is, so, sometimes people just don't care about hitting those exact distances. So for example, there's a race down in Georgia called the Georgia Death Race, and it's about 70 miles long. It's just, they found a good route. It happens to be 70 miles, and that's the course. The other type of ultra race that's pretty popular are fixed timed races. And so this is a little more like what you might see in biking with a crit race or with cyclocross, where you have a set time and people try to get as many laps or as much distance in that set time as they can. And so for ultra running, there's the standard ones. Again, it's a 6-hour, 12-hour, 24. People do 48, 72, 6-day, and 10-day. So yes, people do 10 days. Pretty crazy. Ultra runners aren't known to be sane. I guess I should say that in here somewhere. And then there's a couple of miscellaneous types of ultras. that are out there. So one popular style of racing that's really kind of growing in momentum is one that's they call a backyard ultra. And that is the kind of slang for a backyard ultra is a last man standing race. And so the premise of that is they give you a loop. Traditionally, it's 4.2 miles long, and you run every hour. You have to run one of these laps. And if you miss a lap or if you don't finish your lap within an hour, then you're out. And this race just keeps going until there's one person standing, and that's the winner. Really unique style of race. It was conceived of by the same guy that started the Barkley Marathon. So certainly kind of a unique take on racing. I mean, in theory, it can go on indefinitely, although I've directed 2 backyard ultras, and one of them, the winner did 16 hours. One of them, the winner did 25 hours. The World Championship, they did over 2.5 days. And then there's other special events, you know, that kind of get lumped into the ultra running banner. And that might be stage racing, so multiple days in a row of doing these longer distances and stuff like that. So the terrain, a lot of times when we're talking ultra running, we're not necessarily talking running on the roads, although there are road ultras. There's a lot of trail ultras. I would say the majority of the ultras in the US are on trails instead of roads. And you know, if you've ever done trail running, that can vary everything from a Jeep trail that doesn't really slow you down that much to, you know, super gnarly mountains that you're going up and over. And there's also, I just add in there elevation. Elevation is one of those things that having run road races, you know, running Boston, I know that it's 26.2 miles. I couldn't tell you what the elevation gain is. It's not a metric that people talk about a lot, but when people are talking about ultras, a lot of times they know the distance and they know the elevation gain of that route because the elevation is such an impact in the ultras. So again, it's just one of those things to kind of be aware of when you're doing ultras. And then the other thing about ultras that's different than a lot of, you know, road running races that you might have done, or even some of the triathlons that you've done, is the logistics that you're going to see throughout the course. So first of all, the aid stations, and yes, we call them aid stations. They would be water stops that you run through in, say, Boston Marathon, or even in like a half Ironman. You fly by, you get a cup of water or a cup of Gatorade, and you know, maybe you can get a gel as you fly by, but that's about it. In ultras, especially since a lot of them are on the trails, the access points to get support to runners can be pretty spread out. So sometimes you're only going to be at a support station. It might be every half hour. It might be an hour. It might be 2 hours to get to the next support station. So they set these aid stations up. It's kind of like a buffet table, and they have all sorts of food. You've got, you know, M&Ms and Swedish fish, and, you know, bananas and oranges, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and Coke and ginger ale. So they have all of these things set up because you're going to need to get some stuff in, probably take some stuff for the road because you might not have access to supplies for a bit. And because of that, it means that when you're doing ultras, a lot of times you have to think a little more about being self-sufficient. You know, you have to maybe carry a water bottle on you, or a waist belt that has some water in it, or a hydration pack. So it's just one of those logistics that you have to consider when you're doing ultras that at least I don't find myself focusing on as much when I'm doing road races or triathlons, is kind of where is the support. Because of these aid stations being so far apart, crews and pacers are just kind of a common thing in ultras, especially when you go 50 miles and above. Your crew it's your pit crew. They take care of you. They'll have spare clothing for you if you need to change out clothing. They carry your body glide if you need to, you know, stop some chafing that's happened. They'll have fresh water bottles for you. They're, like I said, they're your pit crew, just like in like NASCAR. They're taking care of you and taking care of all of your needs. You might see them every 5 or 10 miles on the route, and that's it. But they can kind of do the full service treatment. And then pacers, a lot of races, 50 miles and up, you're allowed to have a pacer with you for a certain amount of time. So again, that's somebody that runs with you and, you know, keeps you company. Make sure that you don't miss a turn when you're maybe not thinking properly. Yeah, make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So that's kind of the broad strokes of what ultras are. So training for an ultra. I wish that I could say that it's like this big rocket science thing, but the reality is if you've trained for a marathon, trained for an Ironman, or even a half Ironman, there's not, the volume that you're going to have to train isn't going to be significantly different. There's just a couple of little tweaks that we make to the training to kind of gear you specifically towards ultras. So one of the biggest staples in ultra running training is the back-to-back weekend. So that's a difference from marathon training where you might do a long run on a Saturday and then just a short, easy recovery day or cross-training day on Sunday. If you're training for an ultra, you might do a long run on Saturday and then a medium long run on Sunday. And that Sunday run, that run on fatigued legs, that's where the gains are made. That's where you're training your body how to adapt, you know, 30, 50, 80 miles into a race is by running on tired legs like that. So those back-to-back weekend runs become really important. Strength training is one of those things that, I'll go back to the back-to-backs. I understand that people that do half Ironman and Ironman, you probably do long efforts both days. And so the tweak to that is just, you might make them both running. Or you might make the second day 100% running as opposed to doing one long run day and then one long bike day or doing a bike in there. It's just focusing in on running. Strength training, again, it's something that almost everyone benefits for, but especially the longer you go, the more important it is to have that strength in your legs, not only to overcome some of the mountains that tend to be in a lot of these ultras, but also just to be able to go the longer distances. So having some element of strength training benefits almost every single person who's looking to run an ultra. Speed work, I put a question mark after that, and specifically because in the ultra community, there's actually two camps. There's two trains of thoughts when it comes to speed work. And so there's not agreement universally on whether speed work is an asset or not when you're ultra running training. And so I think speed work is specifically a place where it behooves you to work with your coach and figure out if your body responds to that, or if because the volume is just a little higher than normal, if speed work is a thing that's stripped out to keep you healthy. So speed work's one of those things that I think it's really individual, and it's important to work with your coach specifically to see if that makes sense for you or not. And then tune-up races, you know, just like when you're training up for a road marathon, you're probably going to do a half marathon in the buildup. If you're training for an Ironman, you're going to do, you know, a half Ironman or, you know, some longer effort in the tune-up. Similarly, when you're doing an ultra, you're probably going to do another longer tune-up race in the buildup to test everything out, test your pacing, test your gear, test your hydration and nutrition plan. You know, it's kind of the dry run, but it's also a longer effort, especially since, you know, you're not adding a ton of volume. So you need to have a couple of these key, really long days to set you up for success. So not that much different, right? A couple little tweaks. The building blocks of ultra success. Again, I'm going to just echo a lot of the stuff that a lot of you guys probably know, right? Similar to the building blocks of running marathons or half Ironman, type of races. So, you know, again, you need to look at the training and the rest, equally important. And I feel like a lot of times people are good at one and not good at the other, and that's always the struggle. So hopefully your coach is, you know, working with you and pulling you back when need be and pushing you when need be. Nutrition becomes key, especially the longer you are running. Understanding the nutrition is going to be a huge thing. I find that even for myself in marathons, sometimes I can outrun my poor hydration and nutritional things. When you're out there, 6, 8, 10, 24 hours, you can't outrun poor nutrition and poor hydration. And so you have to be really mindful of your nutrition and hydration. Gear becomes a big thing when you're doing ultra running. So that's everything from the clothing that you're wearing and making sure that the seams don't rub, and making sure that, the shorts fit properly and that they don't really annoy you. But it's also, how are you going to carry the water and the fueling that you need to access in between aid stations? Do you wear a hydration pack? Do you wear a waist belt? Do you carry a handheld? So the gear, do you carry poles? Does the race have so much climbing that you want to carry some poles to help you climb? The gear becomes a more important thing the longer you go, because getting a blister can be a pain in the butt. I finished Boston Marathon with a giant blood blister on my toe. I couldn't have done a 50K with that giant blood blister because it would have popped in that time, and that would have been really uncomfortable. So you also need to be mindful and taking care of any gear missteps that you have earlier on. Mental preparedness. I know that that's a big thing with all of the, QT2 different brands, is working on your mental game. I always tell my athletes that when you're doing an ultra, it's really important to know your why before you start the race. It's important to know why you're out there. And at times you have to draw on that why when, the going gets tough. It can be really easy to want to drop, to want to kind of move on, to want to not be there anymore in those tough moments. But if you can ground yourself in the reason that you're there, the why of it all, you can use that to just push through some of these harder moments. I personally, one of the things that I do in races, I carry a photo with me, and that reminds me of my why. This is a close friend of mine who passed away several years ago, but he used to always love to hear my adventures and my ultra races. And so, carrying this photo in my pack means, when the going gets tough, I can look at it and it just kind of grounds me in, I'm here and I'm doing this because, my friend would have loved to have been doing this and he never got the opportunity. So understanding your why. And then the race day planning and preparation is kind of the last kind of building block as we're building towards success. I'm going to dive into the race planning and prep a little more here. So as we're planning, first thing, know the course. Sounds simple, right? But like I talked about, you could be on roads, you could be on trails, you could be on technical trails, you could be on smooth trails, you could be on hills, you could be on mountains. So knowing some of these aspects of the course is going to help you. It's going to help you tailor the training as you're building up, because whether you got to work on climbing and descending a ton, or whether you've got to work on runnable stuff more often. So knowing what the course is and familiarizing yourself with those aspects, something to look at very early on and get familiarized yourself with. And then understanding the support. So I talked about the aid stations and how far apart they can be. So knowing that and knowing how long it's going to take you in between aid stations will help you understand what you need to carry on you. I did a stage race once, and in the stage race, you were partnered up with somebody. And so basically we were only as good as our slowest runner. And so at times we were tethering up to each other to pull each other up these mountains. And my partner insisted on, rather than saying, okay, there's an aid station 5 miles ahead, I'm going to carry enough water for 5 or 6 miles. She insisted on carrying 3 liters of water, which when I'm towing her skinny little butt up and over Hope Pass in Leadville, Colorado, I don't want to also be carrying an extra 2.5 liters of water that we didn't need to carry. So, for her, understanding the support and understanding what she needed to have to get to the aid station and then taking the 30 seconds to refill, that's the better approach there. So just kind of understanding what's out there. And sometimes that's also understanding the menu at races. They're not always going to have what you want at the aid stations. And so just kind of understanding what they have and thinking ahead on if you need something that's different than what they're going to offer. You know, same as when you run Boston Marathon, if you don't like the type of gel they're handing out, you carry the type of gel that works for you from the starting line. So again, none of this is rocket science. None of this is new. I think it's important to have a strong team around you. Like I said, crews and pacers aren't mandatory in races, but they can be a huge asset, especially the longer you go. So it's important to recruit people that you know, that you trust, the sort of person that knows you enough that when you're having a breakdown in a race, they know that ultimately you're going to hate yourself if you don't finish, and they push you back out on the course, but knows the difference between that and when it really is time to stop. It's important to have those sorts of people out there. It's also important to have a conversation with your crew and your pacers about, here's the way I get. I know with pacers, I tell them, you know, by the time they're running with me at like mile 70, mile 80 of a race, I don't like to be told what to do. You tell me what to do and I'm just going to like shut you down, right? I'm going to be in a bad mood. I'm going to be tired, whatever. So if they think I need to eat something, rather than, you know, saying, hey, Amy, eat this gel, you know, eat these chews. They'll say, you know, hey, Amy, when was the last time you ate something? It has the same effect. It reminds me of what I need to do, but it's not telling me what to do. That's one of those things that I've just learned about myself. And so I communicate that with my pacers so that they're not pissing me off when I'm already in a bad mood. And at the end of the day, they know how to help me in a way that I'm going to be accepting of during the race. The nutrition plan. I know the core diet does nutrition plans. Nutrition plans are, like I said, the longer you're out there, the more important the nutrition becomes, the less you can outrun poor nutrition. So coming up with a nutrition plan, you know, planning out how many calories you're going to eat, what that might look like when you start taking in protein, how many fluids, if you're a salty sweater or not a salty sweater, understanding all of that so that you have a plan for what you're going to take in is just one of those things, you know, it can make a huge difference before a race. And I say all of these things saying, you also have to plan for the unexpected, because a race never goes the way you want. And you could have the most perfect nutrition plan. And, you know, true story for me, you puke. You know, I'm a puker when I do 100-mile races. And all of a sudden you have to just start thinking, okay, what will my body even take in? You know, yes, I understand what the ideal nutrition plan is now. How can I just get in calories that are going to stay down? You know, I have to kind of problem solve through some of that. So kind of, you know, expect the unexpected, or at least have the mental preparedness to have thought your way through some of these scenarios so that when it happens, you're not caught off guard and that doesn't throw your race off. I had one athlete a couple of years ago who her training was going really well. She was going to run Vermont 100. And she, in her mind, she kept thinking, maybe I could finish about 5th place in the race. And, you know, so we talked about it, we put together a plan for kind of her pacing during the race. And so one of the things that she had to do to kind of a little bit mentally prepare herself for the unexpected was to kind of start in visualizing, well, what happens if 10 miles in, she's in 20th place? How is she going to manage that and still feel confident in running her own plan and executing her own plan? Similarly, what happens if she finds herself in the lead 10 miles in? You know, she needed to not stress out, she needed to not freak out, and she needed to feel confident enough in her training plan and her race plan that she could focus on that and not let the influence of other women around her be impacting her race. So that was a big, you know, kind of conversation that we had before the race to prepare her for some of these scenarios that might happen so that it didn't throw her off her game. All right, I'm going to share some ultra secrets. Don't tell anyone I told you. No, you guys would learn this like the first time you go out on an ultra. but it's kind of the unspoken things that I feel everyone needs to say. So the first thing, walking is allowed. People walk during ultras. And maybe that seems obvious, but there are so many people that, you know, they'll run a marathon and they think they can't run a 50K. And the reality is, like, if you've run Boston Marathon where they drop you off before the race, you walk 1.5 miles to the start, then you run 26.2 if you ran the tangents, which you never do. And then you walk another mile or 2 at the end. You've done an ultra in that time. It's just that walking was part of it. People walk in ultras. It's part of it. Some people have run walk ratios that they do. That's part of their training plan. But even the best and the most elite, there's certain mountains that they're all hiking up. You know, at Western States 100, they go up the escarpment in the first 4 miles. And I've been at the top of the escarpment, and everyone is walking at the top of that. Walking is a part of it, to the point where athletes of mine that are training up for certain 100-milers, or even certain like 50-milers that have some good elevation, we sometimes add in some hiking training. They're going to be hiking. Let's make sure we work on those muscles as well. Let's make sure that we improve that as much as we work on the running. The next secret, kind of gave that away with the whole Boston Marathon and before and after. Nearly anyone can do an ultra. I think a lot of times they sound really scary to people, but especially when you're allowed to walk a little bit, they're a lot more accessible than people, I think, give them credit for. If you've done a marathon, you can do an ultra. If you've done an Ironman, if you've done a half Ironman, you clearly know how to move your body for hours and hours and hours on end. You can absolutely do one. Just find one that you enjoy. The other, I don't know that it's a secret, but I guess one of those things that you learn immediately when you're out there ultra running is it's really a community out there. I know a lot of times when I do road races, everyone's running, but they're so focused. They know what their per mile pace should be, and they're kind of in the zone, and maybe they have their headphones in and whatever. There's not a lot of camaraderie among people, and that's fine. When you get on the trails or you get in the longer distances, people tend to band together. Like, no one wants to run alone for 20 hours. So you're going to make best friends with someone for maybe 20 or 30 miles, and then you might never see them again for the rest of your life. But for 20 miles, they were your lifeline, and you guys went through everything together. I've also, a lot of times in ultras, even when I'm competing against women for like cash money, if I'm bonking and a female's passing me, she's giving me, she's offering a gel out of her pack. And vice versa. I've given water to women, other women in races or other competitors or that sort of thing. It's just the community in general, rather than a, me versus you versus you versus you approach to things. It really tends to be a lot of, it's us versus the day. It's us versus the course. It's us versus the distance. It's a community. And a lot of times people are going to talk to you while you're out there. They're going to support you. You're going to support them. They're going to give you encouragement. We have a lot of fun. Quickly, kind of my running lessons. And again, these are pretty universal. You don't have to be an ultra runner for these to apply to you. My first one is just follow your inspiration. I think that when you're inspired, when you're really motivated by what you're doing, maybe even when you're a little scared, that's what gets you out of bed at 5 a.m. to put the miles in, right? So signing up or committing to do something that you're just really inspired by, or that you can't wait for, that's going to help feed the training. That's going to help, feed the success. It's going to help you figure out your why so that you can finish. So follow the inspiration. Don't just pick the race that's closest to you. Pick the race that you get excited about, that, puts a smile on your face just talking about it. And that's going to be a better experience anyway. Don't take things too seriously. Again, maybe that's just how I live life in general. But the reality is, I'm an engineer as a full-time job. Running and coaching, that's my passion project on the side. Like, I'm not making a living doing this. So if I waste 30 seconds in a race to take in a view, I know that I'm going to gain that back later on, because that's going to fill me with joy. And that's going to, it's just going to make me have a better experience. And at the end of the day, we're doing this because we're trying to have these, amazing experiences. We're trying to push our bodies. So don't take things too seriously. I'm to the point where I'm known to like drink a beer during an ultra, just something I do. Maybe it's not something that other people do, but again, just don't. It's just, have some fun out there. Make sure that you're taking in the experience and you're not tunnel visioning to the point where you're not looking at the views, enjoying the people, enjoying the experience, living in the moment. And then kind of my third tip is accept failure as an option. And I don't say that to be a downer. I just say that to say, sometimes when you have these big audacious goals, you're not going to succeed, and that's okay. That doesn't define you. That doesn't make or break you. It's just, you probably learn more from the failures than you learn from the successes. And so just accept that failure might be an option, and that's okay. My coaching lessons or my coaching tips. First one is just be honest with yourself. And I guess I should say be honest with yourself and your coach. It's important to understand where you're at. And that not only applies to like when, say when you're setting a goal for a race, being honest with where your fitness is at, but it's also even when you're working with a coach, being honest about how many days a week you can realistically get in training, or how much time you can realistically get in with training. It's important to be honest with yourself when you're setting up a plan, be honest with your coach, so that they're not giving you training that you're just never going to succeed. And it puts you in this place where you constantly feel like you're failing. So if you can have an open and honest conversation to kind of set those bounds, and then you can just find the best way to kind of maximize the time, the stress, the capacity that you have to put into these things, that's going to be your best chance of success. Like with any endurance sport, consistency, that is just the key of everything, right? You go out there and it's not about, one long day, weekend warriors it's going to be harder to achieve your goals than it is just to kind of go out there day after day, week after week, and keep plugging away, keep consistently putting in the effort. One of the things that I love about endurance sports is you put in the effort and the results are shown. And being an engineer, I like things that are so black and white. You put in the time, you see the result. And I love that. And then I've talked about this a little bit, but, the coaching is the legs are just one part of the puzzle, right? So the mental toughness, the nutrition, the, race approach, those are also parts of the puzzle that are going to influence your training, that influence the how you do on race day. And so I feel like we do a lot of talk on, training the legs and, putting the miles in the legs and doing the strength training and that sort of thing. We concentrate a lot from the waist down and don't think about, the stomach in the middle of the body, the head, all of those things. And so, just kind of be mindful of the other ways that you can impact your success on any given day. That's kind of my broad strokes on ultra running. I'll open it up if anybody has any questions or thoughts that they want to share. Thanks for listening.
Amy, I just have a couple of questions. I have three questions that I thought of off the top of my head. And so the first one is, on a personal level, do you find it easy to find pacers for when you're racing? Or is it hard to recruit people? And then my other couple of questions are, so if I do an Ironman, is there a natural, what's the word I want? Like ultra running distance that you would graduate to, or, if I do a half Ironman, would you say, you shouldn't do over a 50K for your first ultra running event? Or is there, you know what I mean? Is there something that is a natural next step? Actually, and I think you answered my last one. I was just wondering if you had any kind of stories about lesson learned, like what is a dumb thing you did during the race, a race that you thought, oh man, I'll never do that again. You have a couple of examples of those.
Oh, I've got more than a couple over the years. All right, hopefully I remember all of your questions. So yeah, finding crews and pacers. And I haven't found problems with that, but I'll say that you know, if you're struggling at times, if you reach out to like a race director, like if you can't find someone, if you reach out to the race director, sometimes they're plugged into the local community. And so sometimes they can help you find it, or even just help connect you with somebody who's in the local community that can come in, crew for you or pace for you. Most ultra runners really love supporting others, probably because we've all relied on it from one time or another. So yeah, I guess that would be my suggestion for that is, you know, reach out to the RD or a trail running club or a running club even that's local to the event that you're looking at, and see if you can find somebody, or even just somebody that can hook you up with someone that they know. They don't have to be ultra runners. I actually, for many years at Vermont 100, would take my road running friends who had never run more than a marathon and recruited them to come and crew and pace for me. And partly it was like, it was fun to see the awe in their face where they're, you know, I'm at mile 70 and they're like, I don't know how you're still standing, you know, like that was just good for my ego in that moment. But it was also great for them to realize that they could do it. And a lot of them have gone on to run an ultra themselves. And so I'm proud that I kind of gave them that first exposure, even just to stand at an aid station and see the, you know, 70-year-old person go by, or the blind runner, or the runner that's running with arm crutches, or, you know, somebody who's, you know, doesn't look like a stick figure traditional runner. Like they're seeing all body types, all ages, and it made them realize that it was a lot more accessible and doable than they thought. Your second question.
The second one was more about, okay, so I've done whatever distance triathlon I've done, what would be a natural next step?
Yeah. I mean, as long as you do proper training, you can kind of graduate to any of them, but I'll say, kind of from my experience, if you've done a half Ironman, a 50K is well within your grasp. And then with a little additional training, even a 50 miler, I mean, a half Ironman, depending on how talented you are to do that, you're probably out there competing for as long as it would take you to run a 50K. And so it's a pretty equivalent amount of time that you're working. And then the 50 miler would be just kind of a little beyond that. An Ironman, I've seen a lot of people go pretty seamlessly from an Ironman to a 50 miler. And again, with a little bit of, you know, kind of tweaking after an Ironman, you can kind of easily get to the 100K or 100 miler. So yeah. Stupidest thing I've done in a race. Oh boy, there've been a lot. I don't know that I have you're putting me on the spot with a stupid story, but
it's nothing that you want to admit to. Is that what you're saying?
No. It's like, oh, there's so many, and none are coming to my mind. I mean, one of them, so I ran this race called, it's the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc, so UTMB, and it's in Europe and it goes around Mont Blanc. So it's 105 miles total around. You start and finish in France, and then you run through Switzerland and then into Italy and then back into France. Longest I've ever run in my life, in terms of time on feet and distance and everything. And I think I just got really excited. Like that race is like the Boston Marathon of ultra running. And I got really excited. Like I got placed in the elite wave, and, you know, like I went out like guns blazing, and just very early on had problems. I was at mile 19 and saw my crew and puked all over her shoes. That was awesome. Not something you want to do that early. I think my comment to her was, wow, I've never puked that early in an ultra. But so I struggled for a while in that race. But the beautiful thing about it was, like, you know, 50 miles later, I'm at like mile 75. It's about to start downpour raining. And I'm pulling on my rain jacket. And the person that stops next to me to pull on his rain jacket happens to be from England. So like after, I don't know, 18 hours of running at that point, I finally was next to another person who spoke English. I was stoked. That guy, I can't tell you his name now. It's been, I don't know, 8 years since I ran that race. I couldn't tell you his name, but in that moment, he and I walked all the way to the finish together. He was my best friend. I knew everything about it. I met his kid at some point out there. He met my husband, like, just kind of one of those like, beautiful things that came out of, you know, what could have very early on been a disaster of a race. Puking really early on by just kind of getting so excited and so swept up in the moment that I made some really early stupid mistakes. Awesome. I'm going to stop sharing that. I don't know if anybody else. Yeah, Brad, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, so I coach a group of inner city kids. We do primarily obstacle course racing, but the guys I coach are primarily high school and post high school and pride themselves on doing badass things. So, and we typically run them together. So we did an example of something we did. It was a sponsor of ours was going to do something to benefit us for their community. They were going to suggested a 54-mile ruck. You put weight in the back in a pack and you go out 54 miles over the month of March. And that represented the distance between Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, the path that marchers took in 1965. And I took that back to one of my guys and he said, we should do that. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we should do the 54 miles. And I said, well, we haven't trained for that. And he said, well, those marchers didn't train. So that meant we did the 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. And that was the first time that really got me thinking about working with kids. And when I say kids, I'm talking about high school, post high school, nothing before that. Any experience you've had or the suggestions or thoughts that you have around working with, working as a team with something like this? Because the obstacle course racing community is very similar to what you shared about the ultra community, right? Where you're in it together and we're far stronger together than we are apart. So let's go out as a team. But any thoughts and ideas on working with younger athletes?
Yeah, I'm a little, I get a little cautious with working with young kids just because, you know, there's not super awesome science on what, you know, how much is too much for a young kid. And so
well, the exact opposite. If you go too young, there is science that shows don't do that, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say, most recently, what was it, like the Flying Pig Marathon recently let like a 6-year-old run, like there. Yeah, I was gonna say there's a whole thing there anyway. You know, that being said, a couple of years ago, there was actually a local high school kid who I met at the age 16. He signed up for one of my races. He signed up for my backyard ultra. Ultimately, he did 50 miles that day, so he did 12 hours. And when I met him, he told me he was at a school that you had a senior thesis. And so he was like, in 2 years, when I'm a senior, I'm going to run 100 miles as my senior thesis. I remember being a little skeptical, having some conversations with him about it, but then also, you know, ultimately mentoring him to finish his 100 miles. I think the big thing with them is, you know, as always working with kids, like one, keep it fun, right? You want them to have fun. You want them to have an adventure out there. You don't want to take things too seriously. Kids can probably get by with less training in general.
Right. They can make more.
They're pretty resilient, right? Yeah. And so you don't have to put in as much of the longer miles. And that's probably the better approach with younger kids. But like even I work with a local college here, the Hampshire College is the name of the college. And like one of the things that we do, rather than say like an end of the season thing, rather than them running, there's a trail near us that's 40 miles long. And so rather than them running it, we instead make it a relay. So they still collectively as a team can cover the 40 miles, but then I'm not relying on each individual person to try to cover 40 miles. And so it's a lot more accessible, but they still collectively get to do this awesome thing. And so again, it's a way to kind of frame it that might be a little more appropriate for younger athletes. But
Yeah, one of the things that we did, and it's a select few that are part of what we do, because the obstacle course races are the ones we do are at most half marathon, and that's long with obstacles for high school and post high school, and so we had last November we did a 50-mile event up in Jacksonville, and we had a group of guys who were the support vehicle. And that they could participate that way, and that's all they wanted, to be honest. So,
right.
Nobody has to do anything, but yeah, I when I got the invite from Reem, I started thinking about this. That hey, there's something else here. So
Yeah,
you might be able to tap on.
well, it's interesting too. You talking about even those guys like kind of marching, even though they hadn't trained. The JFK 50 milers is really, I think one of the oldest 50 milers in the country. It's down, in the Washington, D.C. area. And it was one that, John F. Kennedy heard that other nations, their military would regularly run 50 miles. And so he's like, well, if US military wants to catch up, we're going to run 50 miles. And at least the story that I heard is like even his brother, Robert Kennedy actually did it one year and probably took him, 16, 18, 20 hours. Where traditionally you have a 12-hour cutoff. But the point is, JFK really kind of inspired a bunch of people to go out and do these longer distances and kind of remove the bounds of times that race directors like me typically put on races to make it more accessible.
That was the inspiration for the event we did in Jacksonville.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's 50 miles. You have to do it in 20 hours. Men had 30 pounds, women had 20 pounds.
Nice.
And they gave you 14 waypoints. So you don't know the course. They give you the waypoints as it starts. And so that's part of the challenge is you have to find, is it going to be 50 miles or is it going to be 57 miles because you didn't do the waypoints in the right order. So
wow.
Extra element of fun.
Oh, it's pretty neat. That's awesome. That sounds like a great adventure.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.